Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's Wednesday Wisdom webinar. Always a slight bit of a mouthful. This is the second one in our series. We've six over the year, and we're absolutely delighted that we're able to offer this high quality CPD for zero cost. And that is thanks to Brightcore. And I will introduce Tracy from Brightcore. She'll quickly say hello and tell you about the safeguarding and mental health and all the other things that Brightcore do. And then I will hand over to Kathryn Gorman, who is going to talk to us about strategic planning. And I will let Kathryn introduce herself because I do find introducing people, especially people with the wealth of experience that Kathryn has got, can be really, really cringy because you always miss out the most important parts. So over to you, Tracy, quickly, if you just want to say hello and a little bit about Brightcore.
Thank you, Alicia. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tracy Hazel, and I'm one of the associate consultants here at Brightcore. And we are so pleased to be able to support the Wednesday Wisdom webinars in order to support leaders and schools across our really valuable independent sector as well. All of the consultants at Brightcore experience senior leaders or DSLs, and we have the privilege of working with over 1,000 schools across the country. Primary, secondary, state and independent, working across safeguarding and mental health and all aspects that we can cover in schools. We appreciate how difficult it is at times like this, and we work closely with our clients to demonstrate good practice and that friendly pair of eyes, and to be a soundboard to if you need some information about the next steps. We also provide essential support to safeguarding leads and mental health support leads to make sure that schools best protect their children. And it's our pleasure to act as a sponsor for the CPD to enhance training and knowledge across the sector tonight. And I'm so looking forward to hearing from Kathryn. So Kathryn, over to you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Tracy. So, Kathryn, yes, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here this evening and to be joined by everybody. And thank you so much, Alicia, for the invitation and Tracy for the support for the webinar this evening. Well, I hope that in the next short while, I'll be able to offer maybe just a few words of advice from experience and that will help people to navigate what are very turbulent times in the sector. If it's okay with everybody watching, from time to time, I might just ask you to do a little bit of reflecting, a little bit of thinking. Use the can people use the chat function, Alicia?
Yes.
Yeah, so use that function if you wish to share your reflections, but please don't feel that you need to. I might be asking you to think about things that could be potentially commercially sensitive when you're thinking about your strategy. So please don't feel that I'm going to ask you to share with the group or anything like that. But hopefully it'll be a useful exercise anyway. And if you're watching this webinar later, because you're watching it that's been recorded, obviously you can still pause and do the same thinking and the same reflection. So I hope that that will be helpful. So let me do my best to share my screen and then I can just introduce myself a little bit more and talk a bit about my experience and what brings me here this evening, first of all. So bear with me.
We should have checked this, but we were too busy before everybody joined the call talking about the sector and the challenges that we got quite sort of animated and we didn't check this. So I do apologise. Are you all right, Kathryn?
I am all right. I am just going to, there we go. Apologies, everybody. I've had to jump onto a different computer than I usually use, and what I can't see is where I'm sharing my screen from. Forgive me just a moment. As you say, we were talking, weren't we, about all the challenges facing the sector. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start talking and I'll just figure that out as I go. My background and what brings me here this evening, which is what my first screen is anyway, so I'll pop that up in just a moment, is that I have been in education now for, gosh, a long time. I started teaching in 1999. I'm by background a secondary English teacher, and I worked initially actually overseas. When I started teaching, I was working in Japan. And I was over there for about 3 years. Moved back into the UK, and I trained, got my PGCE, and then I taught in Yorkshire initially, in a mix of schools, and then moved down to London and I taught in a large secondary maintained school, a very challenging context, which was an absolutely brilliant experience and a brilliant kind of bedrock for my later experience. But I moved then from there into the independent sector. I've worked across all of those years in a mix of co-ed, all girls, secondary and all through schools, and a variety of leadership roles, including headship, which I took up in 2000, 6 weeks before the COVID lockdown. I worked as a head until last April, and at that point I stood down from headship, actually due to some personal health challenges. But I've used that time to really reflect and think about what I want to do next. And what I came to realise in my kind of enforced 6-month recovery period was that what I really enjoy most of all is supporting people in the system. I've always loved helping other people, whether that's, mentoring and developing younger staff, or whether that's supporting people to take the next step in their career, or whether that's enabling others to have a variety of opportunities. And so that's really what I decided I wanted to do next. So I founded Clarion. That's a one-stop leadership strategy and legal advisory consultancy. I'm not a lawyer, but my business partner is. And so we're able to offer a wide variety of services to the sector. I'm also now a level 7 executive coach and mentor. And I'm not saying any of these next things to blow my own trumpet. It's just so that you can see that I've been where you are and I've gained some skills that may be useful. So I'm level 7 executive coach and mentor. A number of years ago now, I did a master's in educational leadership and change. I'm a fellow of the Chartered College of Teachers, mental health first aider, qualified workplace mediator and investigator. And all of those skills I find to be so useful when you are managing and leading change, which ultimately is what strategic planning and implementation is about. I'm also, since I've stopped being a head, I'm now chair of governors at a local maintained primary school, chair of the education committee at a leading independent performing arts school, and a non-exec director of an award-winning online alternative provision. So that is me. However, what I don't seem not to be able to do still is share my screen. So if you just bear with me just for a moment while I look back at this. I was just saying to Alicia at the beginning that I live and breathe in Teams now, and we're in Zoom this evening, and I've jumped onto a different device. So I am just going to mute my audio and just bear with me. Give me 30 seconds and I'll be straight back on.
This is where it's like, as a host, it's an awkward silence. Am I meant to like make jokes and talk, or is everybody meant to just sit there silently? It's like you never quite know, do you, what's the right thing to do? But hopefully, Kathryn will get it sorted. Ah, there we go. Perfect.
Right, I'm back. Sorry about that. It was an unusual setup on this Zoom, and it was not playing with me. So, and I couldn't do it while I was talking. So there we are. That's a summary of everything that I've just said anyway. And as I said, I share this really just to say I've been where you perhaps are in my different roles, and certainly having taken over a headship in early 2020, I headed straight into obviously COVID, but then through the 5 years that I was ahead, we had, as everybody is having to navigate at the moment, a number of other challenges, which included we're a standalone, all through standalone school, 3 to 16, with a nursery, and with the headwinds heading in our direction, we did decide to address the TPS. So we managed those negotiations, and the very last thing that I did as a head was to work with the board to instigate and manage a charitable merger. So my headship, as I say, in that 5 years consisted of COVID, 2 ISI inspections, pension negotiations, quite a significant restructure of the organisation, and then finally a successful merger. So hopefully that shows you that I am equipped to talk about the challenges of the landscape at the moment, and the opportunities that there are, because I do want this actually to be hopeful as a session, and to reassure you that there are things that you can do and that are in your control. So what am I going to be doing this evening? First of all, thinking about actually what strategy is, and what strategy is not, distinguishing between strategic thinking and strategic planning, considering the all-important implementation. I think it's quite easy, isn't it, to get sometimes stuck at the, thinking about the strategy, writing the vision, writing the mission statement, but actually the challenges, I think, come in when we get into the implementation, and that can be where it can get quite sticky sometimes. And so then how do we translate that purpose, or why, if you like, into those tangible actions? And then how does that live in our organisation, that strategic plan? It was quite interesting when I became a head in 2020, and I asked to see the school strategic plan, obviously, as part of the process. And what I was provided with was understandably something that was very focused on the regulations, on the ISI regulations. But therefore, it was very in the weeds. It was very, very operational. And I'm going to come back to this point later. But I think gone are the days where it was sufficient to just make sure that you were ticking things off that compliance list. Gone are the days where also you could just have something that was rather glossy on your website, that you would send out as a piece of marketing material. We need something now that is neither polished and perfect and sort of lives for 5 years before it's looked at again. And between that and something that's making sure that we're compliant, strategy should be a living, breathing thing that exists in that space between, and that's what I really want to talk about this evening. Okay, so the truth first. I think it's very, very important that we think about being really honest. A good strategy honestly acknowledges the challenges being faced and provides an approach to overcoming them. And I think that's a really, really important thing to say. Richard Rummelt said this, and I really like it actually. That word honestly sits very importantly for me in the middle there. I think that, again, you can hear in there that point about the approach to overcoming them, which is what the implementation piece is, but it's the honesty first. So what does that mean? And here's sort of one of the first things that I'd like you to ask you to reflect on. Your context, actually, and I haven't asked Alicia this, and I should have done. I don't know if everybody on the call is UK based or if there are any international members on the call. Alicia, do you know that?
I think they're all UK at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But I'm aware it might go out to an audience beyond the UK, but I am going to touch on some specific UK challenges in this talk, but I'll try not to dwell there too much for people watching from different places. But I think, first of all, thinking about the challenges that might be affecting your organisation is really key. And that means we have to, as I say, be really truthful. We can't just will our strategy into being. And I've been there. I've sat in a room where we workshopped, a vision statement, and we reflected on, where the school had been. My actual first ISI inspection was within only a few weeks of me starting at the school, which was an incredible opportunity actually to get that deep dive and that feedback into the institution, and gave us a really amazing springboard for reflecting on the school's then vision, its strategy, and what we wanted to do next. Obviously, the spanner in the works was then the pandemic. But what we knew we couldn't do was just say that vision, put it in a PDF, and then expect that would happen. And as I say, I think it's quite easy. People talk, don't they, about when organisations have a set of values and they put them on the wall, and they put them in glossy publications, but perhaps they're not actually being lived day to day in the organisation. I think the same can happen with a strategic plan and its vision. So we can't just will it into being. And I suppose a key consideration, therefore, if you are in the process of setting a new strategy, is to think about what are your top 3 constraints, internal or external. And for those of you currently all on the call from the UK, there are some very real and very tangible and very serious threats to the sector at the moment in the UK. And I don't need to list those to you. And you will have your own local challenges, no doubt, as well within that broader framework. It's hard, right? It's a hard time at the moment to lead an independent school. So the UK context provides some specific challenges, but I think it's a really important activity to do is with yourself, with your senior team, with your board, is to list down, see if you can refine down the constraints facing your organisation, and see if you can get those into a top 3. Is it pupil role? Is it a local wealthy competitor school? Is it that actually you are at a point where you want to make some, I don't know, maybe quite radical changes to your curriculum provision, to your actual programme that you're offering, but you feel like it's a very risky environment in which to do that change. But maybe because you're not making that change, perhaps everything's getting a little bit stuck and you're at risk of losing maybe some particularly brilliant and vibrant staff. Perhaps you can't feel that you can't remunerate your staff as you want to. So these would be examples of some of the things that you feel are getting in the way of you building your strategies. And they might be internal, as I say, or they might be external. But I think knowing those and being aware of those is really, really, really important. And those are not just about compliance, those obstacles, those threats. Then certainly not things that somebody else, the bursar or somebody else is supposed to manage and sweep out of the way. Because whatever those obstacles are, be they resource allocation, be they competition, be they risk appetite, they shape your priorities, and they shape the next steps that you make. So maybe as I'm talking, just be thinking about what would those be in my setting, and what would those be? So I've added into the headwinds that you were probably thinking about, actually, and you may or may not be aware, hopefully you are, that there's a new charity governance code. And it's quite different from the governance code that went before. So this is just another thing, I'm afraid, that independent schools will need to be navigating. It places much more emphasis now on ethics, on EDI, on risk and the management of risk, and on board effectiveness. And as I say, none of these things are just about compliance. They all shape priorities and they all shape resource allocation. Okay. So at the moment, I think the heading on this slide really sums it up. You are trying to plan amidst tremendous uncertainty. In a stable environment, those lovely detailed plans that people spend hours over work. We can have everything, nicely allocated in columns, and it's all very orderly, and we can work through them and tick things off, and it works, and we're able to deliver our plans. In a more turbulent environment, I think it's really important that we have a very, very strong strategic intent to fall back on, but also that we are actively scenario planning. A little bit like if you think about a crisis management plan in a school, you have that crisis management plan in case of, well, fire, famine, or flood, in case there's a disaster, your whole IT system goes down, or you have a major security breach, if there's a terrible accident on a school trip, if there's a fire, something like that, the force majeure type of situations. But actually, I think at the moment it's worth role playing scenarios which are a little bit more aligned with those threats and those challenges that are coming from external forces. If you're watching this from overseas and you're in fact in a market that's growing rapidly, so I don't know, for example, if you were in the Middle East, that's still a very turbulent environment. And the risk there might be that, suddenly 10 minutes down the road, a brand new, shiny independent school with tremendously wealthy backers pops up and starts threatening your marketplace. I think that if a board isn't, and pardon the expression, but in the sandpit, actually playing with these multiple potential threats and opportunities, that in itself is a risk. So I think when things start to get turbulent, coming back to what is your strategic intent, what are you trying to deliver, but what scenarios might happen and what do we need to do if they do, is so important. I think when there's an environment of extreme unpredictability, which you might say that is what we're facing at the moment, a really complex time that we're living in, those values that underpin that strategy become even more important. And I think as long as decisions are made that come back to those values are not, I don't believe, soft and fluffy things. They should be integral to the behaviours that are driving the strategic decisions that you are making. I didn't specifically in this presentation want to have a large section that was about AI, but one of the headwinds, if you can class it as that there is of course AI. AI, of course, can help you massively, by the way, with strategic planning, and there are many brilliant people out there who can talk very, very helpfully about how that can be done. I'm sure we all use AI every day. I know I do, and it's there. It's absolutely affecting the way that we live and work and the way that young people learn. Of course, it is. But I think that all I really want to say about AI is, however it is integrated into the strategic planning, again, it needs to be with intelligence and research and proper rigorous data. If it's just lobbed in, I think it won't help, in any way, shape, or form. And we need to be really thinking about, again, how does it enhance, how does it add to our offering, how does it help us to deliver whatever that strategy is. It can feel really noisy, I think, the volume around AI, and it's trying to sort of close that noise down and really think, no, but how can it be useful for us in order to advance what we're trying to do. Anyway, so just a little bit of a segue onto AI, because you might think, she didn't say anything about that. So there we are. There are many, many, many well-known models for strategic planning from the business world in particular. And I could take you through some of those this evening, but I don't think that's particularly helpful. Any business, and a school is a business, operate in an atmosphere of uncertainty. The danger is that they develop strategies that result in bold forecasts, but very timid planning, and risk aversion, which is actually harmful. So risk mitigation is one thing, but actually the effective management of risks should enable your strategy rather than meaning that it never actually comes to life. And if you are in a situation where there is such risk aversion and timid planning that your strategy can't actually get off the ground, at the moment, in the environment that we're in, I think that's probably going to lead nowhere good very quickly. A strategy needs to be bold at the moment. It has to be anchored in reality, of course, and it needs really good data to underpin it. And it needs to be really sharply aware of the context it operates in. But ultimately, strategy is about dealing with uncertainty. We can't control the future, but we can certainly set out how we want to navigate through it. So I think it's about partly an assessment of your odds. Again, the competition, the market, the regulations, all of that needs to be part of your calculations, because at the end of the day, and again, I'm talking in business terms here, but you need to both improve growth and return on the parents' investment. So what is the value that you are adding to their children by them being in your school? And so it's about thinking in terms of probabilities. And of course, one of those probabilities is, of course, the probability of success. But you also have to think about the probability of failure, and then it's about weighing that balance. So again, a little bit of thinking maybe as I'm talking. Are there assumptions in your current strategic plan that are untested, that haven't been in the sandpit, haven't been sort of played around with, to consider all the options? Have you got the data to support the planning that you're doing and the strategy that you're intending? Okay. There is a difference between strategic thinking and strategic planning. I know as a head, I was often asked, for the plan. What's the plan? What's the plan? What's the plan? And of course, I was responsible for providing that plan and, working out what that plan might be. But I think the plan can get in the way of the thinking. And so I would just challenge you really, if you take something back from this session, to think about actually how can we be scanning the ecosystem around us, thinking about alternative futures. Are we being as bold as we can be with the curriculum? My background, my route to headship was up through the sort of academic and the curriculum route. And there is such an opportunity at the moment to really be bold in your curriculum provision, not just by adding on, an hour on a Thursday afternoon where people might do, an IPQ or an HPQ or something like that, but really, really thinking carefully and cleverly. Can we do something much more inventive with our school day that attends to the well-being of staff and students? Why, asking that question, why do we do it like this? And if the answer is, well, because we always have, then it might need examination. So that big, generative horizon scanning thinking the impossible, because right now it's going to be those bold movers. Look what's happening in the online world, in the online space around education. People there are not waiting, they're thinking boldly, and they're providing things that parents are looking for. So how can you do the same kind of bold thinking? What would actually be different from your rival down the road, your competitor down the road? Not in a spirit of meanness, but to distinguish you and to really think about what works for your students, your families, your context, that is unique to you genuinely, and that might be exciting and that might excite your community, so people choose to come to you, rather than, game playing and, poaching students left, right, and centre, actually causing people to choose you because something that you are doing is so on the money and so relevant to your market that they just can't resist it. Planning, meanwhile, is more of a kind of bottom-up ritual. It's incremental and very, very, very important. But without the horizon scanning, I think it's quite difficult to write plans that have really attended to what the market is wanting. And there's a particular challenge here, and some of you on here may be governors, some of you may be governors of a school, or you might work in a school and be a governor somewhere else. And there's a particular challenge here for governors. And as I say, this isn't a statement designed to be critical. I'm a chair of governors in one school, I'm on the board of governors in another school, and have been for, in various places for many years. It is absolutely one of the hardest things for a governing board to do, I think, to think in what is called generative ways. And governance, if you like, you can divide it into three strands. You've got your fiduciary, your duties, what has to be in place. You've got then genuine strategic planning. What is, what are we dealing with? What can I see in front of me? But there's a strategy, there's a plan, I can see where that's going. And then you've got the generative, which is what could be. And my contention would be that not enough time is spent there because, understandably, so much time and increasing time actually has to be spent in the fiduciary. What do we have to do? Is our safeguarding policy correct? Have we checked that everybody's done their, online safety training? Have we got everybody, checked for safer recruitment, etc., etc. Of course, that's absolutely imperative, and I'm never suggesting that we shouldn't do that. But that can be that can crowd. It can crowd the space. So, I suppose all I'm saying really, it's my soapbox, but I would really urge space and time somehow be found to think the unthinkable, really, and to really study schools who are doing radically different things and wonder if could we do something like that? What would work here? And that brings me onto this point. You can have all the kind of wild and crazy ideas in the world, but unless you know if they're going to land and they're going to be appropriate for your context, they are not really worth very much. And it was Stephen Covey, I think, who said, "Seek first to understand." And I think it is absolutely vital when you are beginning to formulate a strategy. And I say I'm talking, and I don't know where you are in your strategic journeys. But if you are about to start to rethink your strategy, to reposition yourselves in a market, listen first, reflect and listen. And that can take a number of forms. It could be stakeholder surveys, it could be forums where, parents and staff and governors, alumni, are gathered together, and they talk about what the school means to them, what their hopes are for the future. I hope I said pupils, but if I didn't, obviously the pupils as well. It might be interviews with staff. And again, taking a sort of slice down through the school. So who are your newest staff, who are your longest standing, and several people in between at different levels of responsibility. I don't think that parent, i.e. buying power, has ever been more powerful. And to give you an example of that, actually from my immediate context, as I've mentioned a couple of times, I'm the chair of governors of a local maintained primary school. In the town where I live, there are, I think, 5 primary schools, and it's not a terribly big town. Right now, there are 90 empty seats in the combined reception classes across the town, meaning that in the maintained school system, what we're seeing across all the schools is parents picking their children up and moving them around the houses. If they're not happy with something, they're off because they know that there's a seat in another school that they can take up. So even in the maintained school space, competition is real. And that's because, of course, we have a falling birth rate and a declining role, therefore, naturally. Never mind then the vagaries of VAT, etc., etc. So listening to your parents, involving your parents, absorbing what they say, hard though that sometimes can be, is vital. And if your parent body are not engaged, they are not going to be saying positive things about you out there, and you want them to be, you need them to be. But equally, as I say, don't forget your alumni, don't forget prospective families. Through your admissions process, people who don't choose you, why? All of that is listening. All of that is listening, and there are many, many people who can help with all of those things. Equally, what other data do you have in school? If you have had a critical incident, if you have had a serious safeguarding situation, obviously protecting confidentiality, but what did that tell you about your systems and your processes? How are complaints handled? Have there had to be any investigations? What did you learn from that? A real kind of risk and operational analysis and looking at all of that internal data. I am not just talking about, a survey that goes out that's click, 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 and you get people kind of answering vaguely in the middle, that's sufficient. I think this has to be deep and it has to be really rigorous to really, really understand the context that you're in. And that gives you then a shared outcome as a senior team and a board. Here is the amalgamated picture or the context in which we're working. And and you can do all sorts of fun things then with that. You can have a strategy day with your board and your senior team where, you distill some of that down into certain adjectives. So, for example, I don't know, something might come out of there that people feel that that the school is very generally a bit reactive. And so actually, what's a word that we want instead of that? Probably proactive, being on the front foot. So what does that mean then for our communication? What does that mean for our policies and our processes? If we're going to say that we're in our strategy, if we're going to say that we're proactive, what does that mean? What does that mean in terms of, tackling mental health challenges? What does that mean in terms of preparing for, academic success? That word proactive, if it's going to live in your strategy, then it has to have come from somewhere and it has to mean something. So that's what this process is about, this slide, about the reframing. It's about challenging assumptions, the scenario mapping. Okay, so if we say this, what does that mean? What does that look like? It can be very brilliantly facilitated and it can be very playful, actually. It might not feel at the moment like playful is what you want to be, but actually testing out ideas and scenarios, being creative in your thinking, that is playful. And then I think it's about, okay, so maybe we need to shift some thinking and being really clear as we do that about what is the outcome. I'm going to say something about accountability in a moment, but who is accountable for that delivery? What is the purpose of this decision? Where does the power sit in this decision? And what are then the opportunities? Which takes you then, I think, through and into a phase where you're rebuilding. So hopefully you have a set of values that are guiding behaviours in the school and decision making. I've put then leadership development and in brackets middle because, and this is an entirely different webinar altogether, but it is my contention that between board and exec or SLT, whatever you term it, and what happens on the ground is a whole tranche of people in organisations, not just schools actually, who are often overlooked. And actually, if they don't have the capacity and the skills to drive change and to take accountability for delivering change, because they are going to be the people at the end of the day who operationalize your strategy, it won't work. It won't land, it won't stick, and it won't be sustainable. So really thinking hard about what that leadership development looks like. That's not to ignore senior leadership development, but it's just thinking about that. It is a gap, and there is quite a lot of data around that being a significant gap in as I say, organisations of all kinds, that middle leaders generally are just asked to do something. It's delegated down to them, but without maybe the support that goes with that. And increasingly, coaching is the thing that then becomes very valuable in that space. So having a coaching based approach to your leadership, to your delivery, I think is incredibly valuable. If you have the resources to actually fund coaching for people who are carrying significant responsibility for delivering strategy, so much the better. I really think it's vital, and particularly for heads versus senior leaders. Your director of development, where if you're a hugely recruiting school at the moment, does your director of development have not only the resources and the team that they need, but are they getting the support that they need to deliver? Because they are probably feeling really under the cosh right now. So a coaching approach or actual coaching to support the delivery of your strategy, I think is such a good investment to make, and that middle leadership development as well. through this process all the time, you're probably going to be improving systems and processes. You know, is it going to be potentially conflictual if you're, you know, trying to plan and deliver a new strategy that might involve change? Yes. Conflict is not a bad thing if managed well, you know, and again, equipping the people who are going to be having to implement the change that the strategy requires with the skills to manage conflict well and positively is an investment that I just never think is a waste of money, and it doesn't need to be a lot of money, but having good conversations, knowing how to talk to people directly, knowing how to deliver difficult things fairly but firmly. These are hard skills actually, but they are well worth investing in if your strategy is going to require significant change. You might hope, and it's really easy for me to put this on a slide and just say it as though it's just going to happen, but that your outcome will be, you know, systems in your organisation that are more resilient and more adaptable, and that there is a shared purpose. I've deliberately not put on the slide the word alignment, because I don't think you ever get 100% alignment, right from chair of governor, you know, to the most junior member of staff in your school and all the way through. That's okay. But as long as there is clarity and transparency in the communication of the strategy and why the decisions have been made, I really do think that helps. It's not going to solve everything, and some people are not going to like it and they might well leave. And actually, managed well, that's okay, because they'll go somewhere where they feel a better fit, and you bring somebody in who might be more in alignment with your strategy. But the transparency is key in that, and dealing with people fairly. I just wanted to say at this point, I think, that the purpose behind all of this, again, sort of never been so important, really, the purpose behind your strategy. And it's about knowing, again, it goes to that values-based decision making. What is our purpose as an organisation? What are our values? And what is true? You know, what do we actually have the data to validate? But beware the bland corporate statement when you're doing this work. You could right now go onto possibly your own school website. I don't know which schools you've come from, but you could certainly go and pick a random selection of 5 or 10 independent schools and look at their website and their vision and their mission statement. And I think when I became a head when I was appointed in 2019 and took over just at the turn into 2020, and I remember doing this exercise and going, so I wonder what sorts of how people lay out their strategic plans and what do they do? And, you know, doing a little bit of kind of looking around and researching. And actually, the strategic plan as a published document was quite a rare beast. I could find it in international schools, but not so often in UK independent schools. Now they're everywhere. But if you go and look at those, they are often very similar to each other. And, you know, you rarely find one that doesn't use the word innovation, for example. And more worryingly, you rarely find one that doesn't talk about, you know, excellent outcomes or, you know, superb pastoral care. And the reason that I say this is because they should be a given. If those phrases are really, you know, a key part of your vision or your strategic plan, it's a problem, to be blunt, because parents expect that. And I have seen my children are now in their mid to late teens. And if I think about how my local primary schools, which is where they both started in their education in local primary schools, which we were very, very happy with. But if I even think now about the quality of the work going on in those schools, I've chaired this evening a full board meeting at the local primary school. And I cannot tell you how amazing that leadership team are and the quality of the work that they're doing. So I think we have to be really mindful that the maintained sector has rapidly accelerated in the last 5 to 10 years. And so if you are telling your parents that you should spend a large amount of money with us because we're going to deliver superb pastoral care and outstanding academic outcomes, they can probably get that for free. So bluntly. And yes, the class sizes might be bigger, but small class sizes, there is no evidence in the data that that means better outcomes. What makes a difference is the quality of the teaching. So yes, you might have, amazing facilities and resources. You might, but parents right now are making decisions about whether they can have the holidays they've usually had, whether they can keep the car they've had, whether they have to move house, or whether they can afford independent education. So, and they might prefer to have all of those things and take the free option down the road. So, your strategy has to be so distinct, and it has to be so in tune with what that market is looking for, to be compelling at the moment. I'm afraid. I think to sort of summarize at that point, then, effective strategy is about being really proactive. It's about focusing on the horizon, on that long-term vision, and making really smart, informed choices that lead to sustainable growth and actually genuine competitive advantage. Just to be flippant for a moment, when I became head and I'd asked for this strategic plan, which, by the way, was really well written and definitely, delivered us a very, very good ISI result in that early ISI inspection that I had. But when I looked at what it said that was unique about the school, it said two things. It said it was all girls, and it said that we had amazing grounds, which we did. That was it. And I think that's the kind of example of what I mean, where you do still see that a lot, I'm afraid, where those will be the sorts of things that make schools unique, and they just don't. And that was therefore really where our listening exercise started, was, okay, well, that's a given, so what else? In the delivery of strategy, where we're trying to embed it, and I've said some of this already, but it's absolutely key that we are being transparent, reducing ambiguity, making workflows explicit, share as much as you possibly can, and build in what I've called the reliability loops, consistent commitments and, communication, compound belief. That's quite a mouthful. Every opportunity that you get as a leader to take people back to that vision and mission, to say, and these are our priorities, and because these are our priorities, this is what we're doing, and this is why, is so important. And it builds trust because you're being transparent and you're showing people the progress that's been made. Again, there are many brilliant ways of building, dashboards and reporting decks and all sorts of things you can do to show people, remember we said we're going here, this is where we are on that journey. This is all, and again, I'm very aware this is very easy for me to say. It's harder to do in real life when you're fighting everything operationally that comes in every day. But so this is an aspirational, but I think, and it's not all going to happen in one day. But it's an important goal to have, to take any opportunity that you have to communicate with staff, with parents, with students, with alumni, and saying to them, we said this, we're doing this. Is a little bit like if you think about best practice in safeguarding and in pastoral care, having those boards up in the school where people's voice is acknowledged. You said, so we did. It's similar to that, actually, as you're moving through your strategy. And I've seen different schools put this into diagrams, that sort of loops literally, and they'll show people we're on this loop, now we're going up around this loop, and now we're going up around this loop, and or more classically, some kind of flow diagram. I think anything like that can really visualize the delivery of the strategy is really helpful. Also, I want to just drop in here a note about different generations in your workplace, because I think it's become very, very important to acknowledge. I think the stat is that there are now 5 or 6 different generations in your typical workplace, and your schools will be no different. Younger staff, your youngest staff, are not only going to value transparency, they're going to demand it. they will expect absolutely nothing less. Because they've grown up with these in their hands, they have access to information in a way that, you know, I'm in my late 40s. I didn't have internet while I was at school. You know, I couldn't get online. I don't think I had a phone until maybe my sort of somewhere in my early 20s as I started work. So it's just very different, and I was therefore more accepting of if somebody told me it's going to be like this, I more accepted that it was. I think that the further democratization of information means that has become less and less the case. But your board members, unless you have been very brilliant and managed to recruit, you know, young alumni onto your board members are likely to be, obviously I'm including myself in this, towards the latter stages of their career or retired. They will not be seeing the difference in the workplace now, and they may have relatively limited engagement with the younger generations. So they might not value so much the transparency, the much more consultative way in which I think you need to build strategy nowadays, that the kind of flatter leadership structures that are really important. But it's so important to design your system so that it supports your strategy in a way that builds trust, and that is done by transparency and by sharing information. As I say, your parents, if you are a prep school or you have a prep department in your school, the parents of your youngest students will accept nothing less. They will absolutely accept nothing less, and they will expect to be involved in your decision making from the get-go. That is just a fact. The market has changed. So I think it's really important as you build your strategy to be very aware of that. So when we're sort of embedding or cascading strategy, I think then it's having this line in mind all the time. I know life doesn't quite work like that, but starting with your purpose, your why, you know, the Simon Sinek, start with why, move to your vision, clarify that, share it, communicate it relentlessly. What are your values? What behaviors do those values drive? What goals are you setting? So if our goal is that we need to grow by 5% in the next 2 years, for example, what then are the measurable objectives that would help us, you know, no further headwinds withstanding, to move towards those objectives? And then what are the tactics, what are the initiatives that might drive that? And then what are the actions and who is accountable for those? The building that you know, that accountability and that agency, as I say, I think is just so important. It reduces ambiguity if people know what they're accountable for. And it's your middle leaders, managed by your senior leaders, who are going to be responsible for operationalizing this strategy. So, for example, in your performance management cycle, or whatever you call it, is it clear how the targets people are setting connect with your strategic plan and your strategic priorities? Are people expected, for example, to maybe have at least one of their however many targets they set that somehow or other links up to your overarching strategic plan? Now, it might not go straight to it. It might go to the department strategic plan, which in itself connects up to the school strategic plan. But weaving those lines, or whatever metaphor you like, down from the strategic plan into the departmental plans. And I don't just mean academic departments. I mean your front of house office team, your admissions team, your ground staff, your catering team. All of those areas of the school need to be coherent with your overarching strategy, for it to really start to be embedded, for it to be achieved, and for it ultimately to be sustainable. And on the sustainability point, I think it's about a good hefty dose of realism, operating in short cycles. This is what we're going to do. We take action and we learn from it. And I said at the beginning, gone are the days where strategy is a 5-year plan. You need to be reviewing this termly at the moment, because what else has happened? We've had the budget today. I haven't had time to really look at what's been said, but these things, these global events are at the moment happening all the time. So I'm afraid that it is beholden upon leaders and boards to then be going, okay, is that going as we expected? Is there anything that we can measure that shows that it's going as expected? And if so, good. And if not, where can we find it? And what might that mean for going forwards? It can be quite helpful. It helped me. I held myself to account by gradually. It took time aligning, the performance cycle in the school with the board meeting cadence, and making sure that these things kind of nicely line up with the policy review cycle. It took time. It took a good 2 or 3 years probably to kind of get those things all nicely lined up together, which involved taking apart some long established habits and systems. But gradually, by degrees, we knew that if we were reviewing the strategy, and we might then need to allocate resources slightly differently or slightly adjust people's roles in order to deliver that next activity, we could do that. And if we needed to update a policy to support that, we could align it with that. Not easy work, hard work, but very valuable. I say, providing that you don't suddenly get hit by a pandemic or something like that. So I think then there have been some shifts which is really important to acknowledge as part of what I'm saying here, really. Now, the first one, you'll kind of think, well, hang on a minute, we're an independent school, of course we have to make profit. But it goes to what I was just saying about your stakeholders and the parents and your younger staff. Purpose is so important. People want to know why. Why is this being done? What impact is it having? And I mean that in a really sort of societal way. I think there has been a post-COVID readjustment of what people value and what they will put a price on. A wholeness, I think, is part of that. The word authenticity gets bandied around an awful lot, but actually, being that visible, authentic leader, again, it's about trust. There's an awful lot of reasons in the world at the moment for people not to trust people. And I think the more that you can do to be visible, to be human, to be funny, to be whatever is true to you, not putting on a show, not grandstanding all the time. Actually, I think that's almost not what we need at the moment, but just being really true and authentic and creating that. Again, it is a phrase that gets bandied around a lot, but that psychological safety among your staff. Is there a culture of risk taking? What happens if people fail? If they're going to take risks to deliver your strategy and it goes wrong, do they feel safe to do that? Do they actually feel safe to take that risk and try that thing out? And again, it's about weighing up what risks can be taken in the current climate. But it's so important that they don't think they're going to be hauled into your office, and their job be at risk because they tried something that they thought was part of the delivery of the strategy. Collaboration, I think, as well, and actually I mean this inside and out of the school. Really, cross-departmental working to develop and begin to think about how the strategy might be implemented. But again, working with other schools local to you, independent and state. This is not a zero-sum game. Work with people to improve the chances and the experience of the young people in your care. I read something somewhere recently that I really liked. All the children in all the schools in your area all drink the same water. So actually, they have equal right to brilliant opportunities. And it's not about closing doors and siloing yourself away. It's actually about having the strategic confidence to be open to opportunities, because that also opens opportunities to them. And that position of confidence actually is very powerful and will send a very strong message. So finding ways of inviting other staff in from other schools to share in CPD, or because you've got a speaker coming, you bring in, invite everybody's sixth form to come and listen to that speaker. Be the person who be the school, who throws the door open. And I think having that openness and that expansiveness as part of your strategy is really important. I think I am very nearly out of time, and I'm very nearly at the end of what I wanted to say. But I guess these are my just final questions for you. Is your strategy robust? If right now your school website disappeared and I hate to put this horrific scenario into your minds, but if your school website disappeared and all of your documents disappeared, would people in your school know what your strategy is and know what to do to deliver it? I think that's a really, really helpful question to ask. And then, have you aligned your resources with that strategy? Is your SLT structured to be able to actually deliver the strategic plan? Do you have the requisite staff then at that middle layer to be able to operationalize it? And do they all know why they are doing what they're doing? I think that, oh, my R has dropped down, but Cotter said the best strategy is doomed if it's implemented badly. And I really do think that is so true. And by the way, have I always got strategic planning and implementation right? No, of course not. Whether I've been a head of department or assistant head of year or, assistant head or deputy head, no. And you have to learn along the way. And I hope what I've tried to give you this evening is just some guidance around some of the things to consider, some of the things to think about. And I think that it is just so imperative at the moment to be bold. It does not feel like it's the right time to be, but I really would urge you to be bold, because I think a contrary stance of fear and risk aversion sends a message that is ultimately not going to be strategically helpful. Okay.
Thank you, Kathryn.
You're so welcome.
That was great.
Let me stop sharing.
No, keep that there because people might want your details.
Oh, okay.
I mean, obviously, it's a whistle-stop tour, and strategy is something that you can talk about for at least a day, if not longer. But I think, you're absolutely right. It's a time to be bold. We've got to have more of an entrepreneurial approach. Fail fast. If your strategy is wrong, if you're all working to the strategy, you'll find out sooner. So a wrong strategy being implemented well is better than the right strategy because you will learn from it and move on. And I think one of the things I've found recently, because I work with a lot of schools on their marketing, is a good strategy that's shared gives a real sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, amongst the staff, amongst the pupils, amongst the parents. And I think that sense of belonging we know is more important than ever in the current world. So I think that's another huge positive. And it also can be really, really helpful in keeping you on track, I find. Sometimes people say, like, why don't we do this? And sometimes you feel like a bit of a fun sponge going, no, we can't do that. We haven't got time for that. Whereas you can say, oh, great idea. Where does that fit into the strategy? And so I think strategy is something that people are often scared of because they're scared of getting it wrong. But just having it there as a framework is really, really helpful. Enables people to come back to it. So I think it was absolutely brilliant to just hear your experience and to talk about how you implement it. And in particular, that difference between planning and thinking, because I think people do struggle with that. So thank you so much for joining us. And Kathryn, if you want to put your details in the chat, that would be great, because I'm sure people might have questions and want to get in touch and see how you can help them. Do connect with Kathryn on LinkedIn. Kathryn posts quite a lot about leadership, very helpful person to. If you want to connect with me, I only go on about marketing. So if you're not interested in schools marketing, I wouldn't bother. But has anybody got any questions? Please feel free to unmic yourself. I always find these sessions quite interesting. When we have them with the marketeers, everybody's talking, everybody's putting stuff in the chat, but there doesn't tend to ever be that much amongst the senior leaders. So if anybody's got any questions, please do put them in. But otherwise, please go and enjoy your evenings, and good luck for the rest of term. I know we're entering into the crazy Christmas chaos. So thank you for joining us.